but there is obviously a clear distinction between applied research and other sort of researches. So like basic research is often described as research which is without any immediate practical utility, and it is driven only by the advancement of theory. Whereas applied research involves some kind of applicability, right? So in your case, it is in your respective divisions and directorates to solve your own sector-specific problems in your professional work, right? And more specifically, it would be in the domain of HRM practices. So when we're thinking of research in this session and in the next session, that's more applied research, and we have a clear aim of using this research and applying this to the jobs that we're doing, right? So what are some of the objectives for this session? So the first one is understanding key stages, especially planning for undertaking applied research. Now someone has raised their hand. Bethiel, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I raised my hand because I couldn't see the presentation. That is what is doing. Something went wrong when loading the presentation. That's why I raised my hand. Yeah, but don't worry. I think we can go on. I'm listening though.
I think we had this issue yesterday as well, and some people were able to see after logging out and logging back in. But it does seem to be a recurring issue, so we'll try to find a solution for next time as well.
I think what we can do is maybe for the next few sessions, send you the presentation like 5-10 minutes before our session starts, just so people who can't see our screens can follow this on their screen.
Yeah, yes, I can see now, and they're taking applied research key steps.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. So the objectives for this session, the first one is understanding key stages, especially planning for undertaking applied research. Now, there are many steps and stages that occur when you are undertaking a research project. So it moves on from even like basic research question till actually disseminating the results of the research you've taken. And there are multiple steps that are involved between these two stages. So it's always better to know what each of these stages are, just so you can follow them and know when and where in the whole research process they come. The second one is understanding pros and cons of different approaches. Now, this is very important to know, because once you know what you want to research on, you have to decide what is the approach or what is the methodology or what is the method that you will use to answer your research question or to solve the problem that you have at hand, right? So besides knowing what are the different methodologies and what are the different approaches, you should also know what are the pluses and what are the minuses, what are the pros and cons of these different approaches, which of these approaches will be most suitable to your situation, which of these approaches would be most suitable keeping in mind the resources you have, the time you have, etc., etc. So we will also go through that. The third objective is developing a research question that you will keep in mind throughout this course. And this is very important because we want you to pick a domain, we want you to pick up a sector, delve into that sector, look at some problems that exist or any problem that you want to study in that specific sector, and then uh, use that problem to devise a research question and essentially broaden it to a project which you will carry over for the next 8 weeks of this course. And so, like, if you pick up one particular research question, we would hope that by the end of this whole course, by the end of these 8 weeks, you will be able to undertake some research on your own to answer that research question and know exactly where to collect literature from, how to collect data, how to disseminate results. So this is a very important part, and we will keep coming back to what each of you have picked as your domain, as your sector, and what is the research question everyone is working with. We've already shared our homework, so I'll move on. Yeah. So this is something that I would like everyone to discuss, perhaps in the Google Sheet that was just shared, or you can just put something in the chat. So everyone, we all came to this training session knowing that we'll be learning more about applied research. And the most important question before we even begin to understand applied research is why? Like, why are you interested in applied research in the public sector? What is it that drives you? What is it that you've observed in your surroundings? Because all of you are practitioners, all of you have dealt with the specific problems in the public sector. You've seen how things work, you've seen how some things can't work, right? So it would be useful to know just randomly if you could tell us what is your motivation uh, to like do some applied research in the public sector. So if you could put your answers in the chat, or if you could put your answers in the Google document that Adrienne shared, that would be lovely, just so we can get some sort of discussion going, we can get some sort of conversation going, just so we also know what you're thinking. And yeah, we can take it from there. Yes, Daniel, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, yes. Good afternoon. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat, so I have to speak. Other than
Yeah,
that,
excellent. We would love for you, everyone to speak. So yes, please feel free to speak. Go on,
yes.
Daniel.
The reason why we are interested in applied research is that in public service we are offering services, or our work output is used, or it becomes the basis for decision making. Decisions that affect millions of people, thousands of people, directly and remotely. We are also looking at the cost implications to government. And so financially, directly, what are the cost implications? And so whatever decision we are making should be evidence-based. It should be backed by certain information or data that says that we are based on the facts available to us. The best way to go is X, or the best way to go is Y, based on the facts. One of the things that we have as our motto in the civil service is service excellence and loyalty and excellence. And how can we offer excellent service? How can we be professional in our services? It is based on sound analysis of the data that is available to us, sound analysis of the facts that is available to us, because we are rendering service that is supposed to be objective, service that is supposed to be selfless, service that is supposed to be fair and transparent. And therefore, this is the best way that we can offer service that will meet these characteristics. by basing our decisions, our actions on available information, available facts, available data. And so every action that we take must be based on evidence. And that is why we do this applied research, because we are offering service to people that we may not even be aware of, but who will be affected by our decisions and actions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent, Daniel. Thank you so much. I would go on to Isaac next. Isaac, please feel free to unmute and tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, good afternoon again.
Yeah.
I think Daniel said a lot, but my point now is you rightly mentioned that it's an applied research. Okay, so once applied research is brought into the context, it means that whatever data, whatever solution we're offering in the Ghana Public Service should be contextualized to the Ghana Public Service. We're talking about applicable solutions. From the very beginning, we were mentioning, we're trying to do comparative analysis of socioeconomic data from India and elsewhere. So it means that you can find out some countries who have the same income, okay, national income, but then they might be developing at a different rate. So that what we should be asking ourselves is, if we took the solution from India and we brought it to Ghana, will that work? That's the kind of applied research we're talking about here. You have the data, you have everything, but then with the solution in India work in Ghana, because we're dealing with applied research. So applied research simply means the solution you're offering to be contextualized. You cannot take what is happening in the head of civil service and just apply it to solutions, to situations in or at Ministry of Trade. It might not work. So we can have the broader framework, but we must have contextualized solutions to contextualize problems. Otherwise, it will not be applied. It will be theoretical.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Isaac. Hafiz, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us your thoughts?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah,
Can
we
you
can hear.
me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. The reason why we need this course, or we want to do applied research, is look at our core functions as civil servants as a whole, for that matter, in Ghana. Most of our things we do is we say we are trying to help the political authority to formulate policies that will inure to the benefit of what? The public. And you can't formulate policies, or you can't bring out policies in a vacuum. You need to have certain kind of data, certain kind of work done, so that when you are formulating those policies, you should have basis, and then those policies can be able to address the solution, the problems that you've gone to find out, or you've gone to what is in terms of your research. So I think that in terms of this course is going to help us in terms of the modern trends. Things are changing fast, and then a lot of things are happening. So the way things are happening, can we go on to doing the old ways, the old things that we do, trying to sit somewhere without going in to look at the root causes of issues, and then to get the needed solutions or the appropriate answers in order to fix the problems that the public faces? So as civil servants, our core mandate in terms of policy formulation and then implementing the programs that come as a weight, I think applied research will help us a lot to get to the root cause of problems that will give us the right solutions, so that we will not put, as they say, round square, these impacts in square holes. So I think this course at the end of the day will help us to do the research well and apply it where it belongs, the data that we use.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Aisha?
For me, I just want to add something small to what my colleagues have said. I think as civil servants, our work is more practical. So in choosing the applied
Hello?
research, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Sorry.
Yes, please. We can hear you, Aisha.
For me, I think our work as civil
Hello?
servants is more practical. So we need this applied research in order to
Hello?
solve practical issues or problem facing us in the service. So for me, I think the applied research will work for us so that since our work is more practical, then we'll be able to solve issue practically. I think basically that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello? Um, hello?
I'm not sure who this is.
Please, can I speak?
Abhishek and Adrienne, can you
Hello?
figure out who this
I
person
think
is?
it's Jane.
Hello?
Jane wants
Yeah,
us.
yeah, please go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to make a point. Am I clear
Yeah,
enough?
sure.
Can I speak now?
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Yes.
So I'm listening to my colleagues on the fact that we need evidence to be able to make informed decisions. There is another aspect of the applied research that I think the civil service we have a little issue with. And I think this course will be able to help us do a rigorous evaluations of some interventions that we think would solve some of the problems that we identify. So sometimes we do research, we come up with recommendations or issues that we think those recommendations could solve, but we are not so sure if these interventions are really going to work. So another aspect of our work is to really evaluate the interventions that we have in mind and see which one actually works for us. So I think that is the gap that generally we identify after doing all these research, coming up with recommendations, identifying problems, and then the solutions, bringing solutions, to these problems is the key issue. So for me, I think the area that's my focus or what I really expect from, this applied research in public sector is to evaluate the various interventions that we have in mind and how they actually apply in the public sector so that we can be effective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I think I'll just quickly summarize what everyone said. So the reason why most of you, and I've read some of your answers in the chat as well. So thank you for those of you who put in your answers there. But yes, what came out broadly from this discussion is that since all of you are public servants, it's important that you, and also because the work that you do affects millions of people. And so it's important that the decisions that you take here in your daily life, big decisions, small decisions, the decisions that you take in your work life are informed by evidence, are backed by data, they are context specific, they are transparent, they are just, they are equitable, and there should be and there should be a clear reason as to why you're taking those decisions. So, which is exactly why we thought we would get all of you together to talk about this. So yeah, thank you for this excellent discussion. And I will now move on to the next slide. So yeah, we will actually start with the steps which are involved in applied research. So this is a bit more theoretical, but I still want everyone to already start thinking about a particular research interest or domain that you have that you can then refine through the session and come up with a research question. So the first step is, of course, your research interest, right? So you may be interested in a sector which is where you're already working in, wherever, let's say you're working in a particular directorate. So maybe you are interested in that sector. So let's say I'm interested in incentives for public sector workers, right? So maybe, so that is what I will classify as my research interest. The second is literature review. Now I will look at different literature or different research papers that have already been written on incentives in the public sector. Now when I think of incentives, I think, oh, maybe they can affect motivation, maybe incentives can affect productivity, amongst other things. So I will also go ahead and look at literature which talks about motivation. I'll look at literature which talks about productivity in the public sector and see what this literature says, what these academics who've already done some research previously says about, what do they say about my research area. Then once I have done like a basic literature review, I've read the research that has been done in my domain, I will then see where the gap is. I see a lot of things have been said about productivity and motivation and financial incentives in Ghana. A lot has been said in India. A lot has been said, in like higher pay scales, lower pay scales. So I'll try to see where is that gap that I can use and utilize in my own research. And I will look at that gap, and that will prod me towards my possible research question, because there is a clear gap in literature, there's a clear gap in research in that area. And if that interests me, I could pick that as my research question. Then the next one is developing a theory of change. Now, a theory of change, again, like coming back to my example of now, let's say my research question is how do financial incentives in the public sector affect motivation and productivity, right? So there are a lot of steps between increasing or decreasing financial incentives and increase and its eventual effects on motivation and productivity. So there will be like inputs, there will be like some processes in the middle, and then there will be like impacts, outputs, and outcomes, which in their entirety form the theory of change, and they show clearly what are the steps that move from the inputs to the outputs. Then the next step is deciding on a research method. So there are multiple research methods. You may want to look at the qualitative research method. You may want to go the quantitative way. And within these two methods as well, there are like multiple methodologies, right? Do you want to do an experimental methodology? Do you want to do like a more theoretical methodology? And so yes, so there are multiple ways of looking at your research question and then thinking on how to like answer, and that's what your research methodology will do. The next question, the next step is choosing the data collection method. Now, this is very important because this is a very time-consuming process. Again, like you need to decide whether you will conduct interviews, whether they're qualitative or quantitative. You have to decide whether you want to collect primary data. You have to decide whether you will be using secondary data that someone else has collected. You will decide whether you want to use census data. So there are like different ways that you can collect your data, and also a very time-consuming and resource-consuming process. The next step is implementation, which is the actual collection of data. So once you have decided on a data collection method and you have everything above the data collection method ready, you will start implementing your project. You will start looking for data, you will talk to people, and that is a long process. You will, when the implementation is happening, you will keep checking your data if it's correct, if there are inconsistencies, if there are errors. So that's what you will do during the implementation stage. The next stage is data analysis. So when once you're done collecting your data, you will then sit with it and analyze it. You will see what it tries to tell you when basically you will then try to look at various ways of analyzing the data, and then you will use multiple methods, you will use multiple softwares to see what that data tells you. I can't see the next stage on my slide. Adrienne, can you let me know what the last stage is?
Sure.
Communicate.
Communicate findings.
Oh, yes. And the final stage, of course, is communicating findings. So once you've done all of your research, you're done with the analyses, you're happy with your results, you will then put pen to paper and start writing and then communicating those findings. Now, this is very important because then you will have to see how to communicate those findings best to certain groups of people, whether you are using those findings to talk to like the general population. Are you using those findings to talk to a policymaker? Are you using those findings to talk to a researcher, right? So there will be like different ways in which you present your findings, and they will differ according to your reader or audience. I think someone raised their hand. Hafiz or Isaac, did either of you raise your hand? Alan?
Yes, I did raise my hand.
Yes, sorry, go ahead, Hafiz.
Yeah, please not to draw you back. I was trying to ask a question regarding the season, what the research method that you're going to decide on, does it have any bearing on the collection of data? What kind of medium or what kind of method you're going to use to collect your data?
Yes, so I think when we will go through each of these steps in detail later on. So the research methodology that you apply will definitely affect what sort of data collection method you employ. So when, let's say, for example, I say my research methodology is I'll conduct an experiment. I will conduct a randomized control trial, right? So once I think that this is what I want to do, my data collection method cannot be just qualitative. Qualitative may aid my research, but then eventually I will have to collect quantitative data. So the research methodology that you pick will in turn affect the data collection method, and Adrienne will come to it later on. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thanks very
All right.
much.
Yeah, thank you. Alan?
In your earlier presentation, you did indicate that usually when you have to identify a gap in literature, and that forms the basis for which you would researching. This question is not to say one is being lazy about it, but I want to know the key or critical to identify the gap.
I'm sorry, Alan.
Hello?
Yes, I'm so sorry, Alan. You were breaking off, so I couldn't hear the entire question.
Connectivity. Okay.
If you could just type.
Please, can you hear me?
I would be happy to answer.
Okay. All right, I don't have access to my chat box, but I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hello?
So if you would, yes, go ahead, Andy.
I was saying that in your earlier presentation, you did indicate that in literature, you have to identify a literature and then, sorry, looking at the literature, you have to identify a gap in the literature. And that forms a basis for the specific area in literature that you have to look at. So is it the abstract? Is it the introduction? Is it the findings? Is it a recommendation? This is not to say, I know that you have to read and read and read, but which areas do you have to critically look at to identify the gap? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really the findings that you would be looking at to identify gaps, right? When you conduct some sort of research, it's mainly to answer a question or to like test a theory, and like the essence of a research paper. I mean, of course, some research papers may be focused very much on the processes, but in a majority, in a large number of cases, I would say you look at the findings and see what they say about the research question, whether they actually answer the research question or not. Uh, so yeah, I think it's the findings part, but generally, I would say even if there is a particular research question and research has been done on it, and if you have another way of approaching that research question, I think that could also be a gap, right? So there's no one particular way of looking at a research paper and saying, hey, if I look at the analysis, or hey, if I look at the findings, I will be able to like find the gap. You have to look at research papers in their entirety to see, because the same research question may have been answered using a different methodology, the same research, and you may use the same research question with a different methodology. So it's really dependent on the paper in its entirety rather than a particular section. But if I have to like pinpoint something, I would say largely I would say look at the findings and see if there are other, like if you hope to find other things.
Can I just add
Thank you.
one point in addition
Yeah.
to what Mantasha just said? So, Alan, that's a very good question. And of course, the key idea behind why we want to do literature review is that suppose you have a question in your mind. Most probably, a lot of work has already been done related to what you are trying to find. So, first thing is that not to reinvent the wheel. Maybe what you're trying to answer, somebody has answered it. So why should you, I mean, rather than doing your own research, the first thing is that, okay, if my question can be answered if somebody has done particular research, and that's great. Of course, there would be cases where I mean, the earlier research would make you a better person in terms of understanding your question, but still you will need some more research because the previous research will not completely answer your question. And just to give you an example, because the way economy functions, it changes over time. So a lot of research, if you go back to early 60s, 70s, 80s, all of them would tell you that, okay, for the way country can progress, become richer, is focus on manufacturing industry, because that's where you can generate a lot of employment. But then now you would see that countries actually do not try, they straight away from agriculture, they move to services. So if what has changed over time? So to be able to answer that, you first have to answer why earlier research used to say that, I mean, manufacturing is better. So some people have started researching on that, and they now find that, okay, earlier manufacturing used to be very labor intensive, but now it is much more capital intensive. Things have changed over time. But to be able to understand how things have changed, you have to first look at past literature. Abstract is fine, but then if you find something more interesting, then you have to go into introduction. And maybe if it is very, very related to what you're trying to answer, then you will look at their methodology, how they have done it. But just starting with abstract, just to know whether this paper is useful or not, is a good benchmark. I mean, you can start from there. And something more useful, you can read at intro and maybe also a methodology. That's how maybe one can approach if once you start with a research question.
Yeah, thank you, Abhishek. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the sense is that you don't have to do something groundbreaking that no one has ever done or thought of before, but the question or your area should have some aspect of originality, right? You could focus on a specific location or take a new angle on a long running debate, as Abhishek just said. Does that answer your question, Alan?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, now when you're looking at your interest area and you're doing your literature review, there are lots of questions that you have to keep in mind while you are, like doing your literature review. So of course, what you want to investigate are your findings going to be interesting? What has already been done? Do questions remain? Like, of course, there are gaps. There are like other major questions also, right? Yeah, what are you trying to accomplish? How interested are you in the idea? What information do you need? How much information do you need? And like, also, why do you want this information? When do you need it? From whom are you going to get this information? What other resources are available to you? So focusing on the gap in literature would, it requires you to think carefully about these questions. You can also, like, are you finding too much information on after doing a literature review? Perhaps then your topic is too general, or if you're finding too little information, then perhaps your topic is too specific. So as you develop your research question while you're doing your literature review, you might find that you need to ask like a broader or narrower question, depending again, like upon the time that you have and the resources that you have. So yes, like I said, the best way to think of arriving at your research question is thinking of a broad area of your research interest, then doing literature review in that area, and then finding that gap in knowledge. And all of these three combined will lead you to the research question. Now, strong research questions. What are some attributes of a strong research question? It should be interesting. It should not be something that has already been done before, or, like there are some questions or some research papers that talk about the same thing ad nauseum, and you don't want to be doing that again and again. You want to make it, and even if you're picking something that has been done before, how can you make it interesting, right? So again, like, original, it follows from the fact that it's interesting. It should be generalizable. It should not be something that I cannot test, right? Like if you have done it, I need to be able to test it. It should be shareable and publishable when peer researchers review it, they should be able to see that it's robust, right? It should be sensitive and objective. You should not have your own feelings or your own biases introduced in the research. It should be reliable, and the methodologies and the measures that you use should be able to be used by someone else and have them and arrive at the same answer. Your research should be replicable. I should be able to do the same thing that you did and find the same result. It should be ethical and actionable. And the last and more important thing is that it should be practical, right? Like I should look at my time and resources and see that whether it's feasible or not. If I'm looking at a research question and I find that it'll take me 3 years or 4 years to answer this question, and I'm a public servant, in 3 or 4 years, the government that I serve might change. So it might not, then what I find from my research might not fulfill the aims of the government in the next session. So it should be practical, and it should be within your research, your resource constraint. Yeah, so these are just some examples of interest areas and possible research questions that may come from it. So if your broad interest area is, if you want to look at methods to motivate public servants, one of your research questions can be, do financial incentives for strong performance lead to increased reported motivation? This is what I said at the beginning is maybe my research area, right? If I look at financial incentives for public sector servants, do they lead to better motivation? Do they lead to better productivity? Maybe another interest area could be how to increase retention of skilled civil servants. So one of the research questions there can be, what are the primary determinants of a civil servant leaving the service? So there are like many interest areas, and there can be multiple research questions within those areas. These are just some examples, and we'd love to hear from you in a while about what are some of your interest areas and some of your research questions later on in the session that you've been able to hone and skill once you go through the whole presentation. So for the purposes of this session, we will use this first interest area and the following research question, which is, do financial incentives for strong performance lead to increased motivation and productivity? So I think now I would request everyone to think of a broad interest area, and then think of what are some of the domains within those interest areas that you could possibly look for in a research question. And then, Adrienne, should we break for a little interval right now and then come and discuss this? Okay. So what
Sorry,
we'll
I'm
do,
having trouble unmuting. Yeah.
no worries. Yeah, so yes, we will break for about 5 minutes from now. And we'll see you back in 5 minutes. You can go stretch your legs, take a break. But do think about this activity. We will come back and hope to have more answers from you. We would want to know what is it that you are interested in, what are some of the sectors you're interested in, what is a potential research question that you can think of. Of course, you've not done literature review right now, so it's not possible for you to find that gap in literature, but we just want to hear about your interests in your own areas. So this is something we'll come back and discuss, and we'll see you in 5 minutes after a short break. So see you soon.
Hello, everyone. I think we'll give everyone 1 more minute to come back and then we will start again. Maybe in the chat, you can write ready if you are ready to go. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for those of you who have said that you're ready. Mantasha, did you want to ask for some people to share their research questions and then I can continue on the presentation? Great. I see that many people are ready and Maxine has already added a research question to the chat. So please feel free to either add your research question to the chat or raise your hand and share out loud. We'd love to hear. Would anyone like to share a research question out loud or maybe a research interest that you don't have a specific question developed for yet? Yes, Daniel, please. Daniel, are you there? You're welcome to unmute and share.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yes, I would like to share my research area of interest. Increasingly, there is automation of work processes in the public service of Ghana. A lot of departments, agencies, commissions are introducing online services and they are digitizing their services or aspects of their services. So I'm interested in knowing how does digitization affect the morale and performance of staff? I'm saying this because, yes, hello.
Hello, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue.
Okay, so I'm interested in automation of work processes, or what has come to be known as digitization. Since the year 2020, increasingly, when COVID came, we're all asked to work from home, and a lot of strategies and methods have been adopted to reduce face-to-face contacts with our clients. And so I want to know, that's my research area, automation of work, my area of interest, automation of work processes. And then my question or research question is, how does digitization affect equal access to public service? How does digitization or automation of work processes affect equal access to public service? Knowing that not all people, especially in our part of the world, have access to the same sophisticated telephones, laptops, and even the internet. And even when they have, how sophisticated are they in using these things to access public services, which have been rolled on to the online applications or have been digitized? So, area of interest, automation or digitization of work processes. Then research question, how does digitization affect equal access to public service? Thank you.
Excellent. So it sounds like you might be interested in asking, as digitization increases, how do the number of people accessing public services change? How do the kinds of people who are able to access civil services change? Who is accessing?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share a question? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next section. We've had such great discussion today, so I don't think we'll actually be able to get through all of the slides. But I'm really happy to continue discussing and make sure that this is the most applicable for you possible. So I think the important thing is for you to continue sharing what you're working on in your positions. So let's keep doing that. The next step, which will really help us break down research questions into something that is applicable, is to develop a theory of change. So I know that Alan asked yesterday, how can we figure out the right question to ask? Sometimes we have a very broad research interest, and it's difficult to create a defined question that will help us answer something about that broad interest area. So a theory of change is a framework that we can use to break down the big question into steps that we can actually investigate. And I will share these slides after the session. So if I'm not able to read all of the information on the slides, you will still be able to read it afterwards. So we're going to go through an example with that research question that Mantasha mentioned, which is, do financial incentives for strong performance lead to increased reported motivation? Now, we're doing applied research, so this is not a theoretical question. We can't ask ourselves, in theory, would financial incentives lead to increased reported motivation? We can probably say, yes, in theory, it might. But what actually happens when we put those financial incentives in place might be something very different. So the theory of change helps us break that down into steps so we can see if each step happens as expected or where something happens that was unexpected. First, we look at inputs. So one input for this particular research question might be the announcement of bonus payments if staff successfully complete a desired task. There are other inputs. For example, there needs to be a system to pay those financial bonuses. Do staff understand the announcement about the bonus payments? So there are many steps that need to happen for financial incentives to actually occur in practice, not in theory. Those inputs lead to outputs. In this case, it would be that productive staff receive the bonus payment if they accomplish the task. So those staff who qualify actually, in practice, get the financial incentive. This leads to the outcome that staff are motivated to receive the payment and a greater number of staff complete the task. And then finally, the impact is that the civil service becomes more productive. So this, we can think of the theory of change as a story that we could tell where the answer to our research question would be yes. If the answer to our research question is yes, financial incentives for strong performance lead to increased reporter motivation, what are all the steps that have occurred? Now, this seems pretty simple, but there are a lot of places where it could go wrong. There are a lot of assumptions that we're making when we say that this is the story that actually happens. So now I want you to invite you to think, if this was the story that we would tell if the answer was yes, what if we do our data collection and we discover that the answer is no? So imagine that we decide that we're going to implement financial incentives for some staff. And then we collect data and we analyze the data and we realize that staff do not report being more motivated and staff, the civil service does not appear to have become more productive. If that's the case, what do we need? What will explain that no? How can we understand that no and what actually happened? So, for example, with inputs, we said one of the inputs was the announcement of bonus payments. Questions or assumptions that we are making that might cause that input or that story to break down are, do the announcements actually happen? So we need to track and collect data on whether the announcements actually happen. Do staff actually hear that announcement, or does it only go to supervisors or a certain number of staff and others never hear? Do staff actually understand the announcement? From the output side, there are places where outputs could break down. So is the bonus actually paid out as expected, or do staff not receive that bonus? There are also ways that outcomes might break down. Are staff actually motivated by a bonus payment, or is there something else that is more important in their motivation? And then finally, with impact, we might even wonder if staff complete more tasks, does that mean that the civil service is actually becoming more productive, or are some of those tasks unnecessary? So there are a lot of ways that we first want to think of the story of yes, what are all the steps that need to happen in order for the answer for our research question to be yes? And then then the second question we have to ask ourselves is, if the answer turns out to be no, are we going to be able to explain that no? So I'd like to give you, in the last few minutes that we have, I'd like to give you an opportunity to start creating a basic theory of change. So I know I invited you to have a paper and pen today. I think it might be helpful to write this down on a piece of paper. I also have a template in a Google Doc that you can use. So I will share that in the chat, but I know some people were having trouble with it. And you can also refine, if you're working on something like a theory of change for your work already, please feel free to refine that instead of using this specific framework. There's many different ways to develop a theory of change. So if you have something you're working on already, please feel free to do that instead. But for now, please take these next 3 minutes to get started and to ask us questions about a theory of change. And then we will also, this will be the homework for next week, will be to continue developing this theory of change to this stage. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. If you do, I also thought maybe in the last 2 minutes, in preparation for doing this theory of change for homework, we could try an example together in order to make sure that the system is understood. So what if our research question was Daniel's question, I think it was Daniel, about how does digitization affect or does digitization affect the number of people who are accessing public services? What would be an input in that situation? Feel free to write in the chat.
Hello, Adrienne. The question again, please.
Sure. So if we have a research question that is, does digitization affect the number of people accessing public services? How could we create a theory of change for that question? So for example, what would an input be? So I'll write that question in the chat. And I know we're about to run out of time, so we might revisit this next time, but just to get you thinking, does digitization
Thank you.
affect the number of people accessing public services? I'll very quickly summarize my first thoughts on these. This is a new question for me, so I'm just, this is just an example. So an input for this question might be that digitization actually happens. So I'm not sure exactly how that happens in the Ghanaian government, but some services become digital would be an input. An output would be that people access services using the digital method, and people access services maybe people access services using the digital method instead of a non-digital method. And then an outcome would be that the number of people accessing services might change, and we might break that down a bit more into who is accessing services. And then the impact would be that, well, this might depend in the way that you want to frame it, but either that the civil service becomes more productive or that it becomes only accessible to certain people. And those are the steps that we want to test if they're actually happening. I'm sorry that I went through that quite quickly. As I said, we will revisit this and I will send these slides out for you to look at more carefully. But for homework, please just try to make a very basic theory of change, thinking about what are all the steps that need to happen in order for you to tell the story of your research question. Are there any final questions that I can answer for you before we let you go? Okay, if there are no more questions, I will be sending these slides out along with the, oh, Hafiz, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Just I wanted to know in terms of the theory of change, in terms of the inputs and then the outcomes. Are there any specific indicators or things that you could look at in order to come out with the right input pertaining to the question that you have in terms of the research? Looking at what we have here on the on the chart, on the slides, is it that the inputs are limited or they can go beyond just the 4? And then what will we be looking at to really identify the specific inputs that will have the right answers to your question, that in terms of
there might be many inputs. So certainly it could be more than 4. I think that initially we might want to focus on the most important inputs for our question. So of course, for example, for this financial incentive, also we need to have, telephones or cell phones need to exist, or email, in order to have this announcement be heard. But I think if you can make big categories, so instead of cell phones must exist or email, just ask, is the announcement needs to be heard in some way. So you don't need to break it down to every tiny input, but a category of input. And how many you have is going to depend on your question. But let's say for this exercise, to keep it to the 3 or 4 most important inputs.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I apologize. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, with the sample question we are talking about, when we say, does digitization affect? The effect could be positive or negative. So are we assuming a positive effect or effect in this case?
No, so actually I would like, so that was another example. For the exercise, I would like you to use your own research question. So think about your own research question and what does implementation actually look like? What will you actually be studying, and break that down into steps.
All right, I ask because if we don't frame the question properly and it gives us double barrel ends, then we're looking at, because what we did for the financial incentives was increased, it was specific, increased reported motivation. But if we say effective, it would have increased or decreased. So should we be specific in our questions so that we have just a single output, or that's what I'm asking. So we know how we frame our questions.
I think that's an excellent question. And I think that's one of the advantages of a theory of change is it will help you make your research question more specific. That is the goal. So yes, I think as you do this, you will realize that I need to specify the research question, and please do that. Okay, I'm sorry for keeping you late and for going through this last section a bit quickly. I will email out the slides as well as a reminder about this exercise and the instructions. And we will see you next Wednesday. Thank you all so much for your participation today.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, and have a nice weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.